what 4A had been used to making up until this point, it embraced this new direction wholeheartedly. The studio had a lot of experience working within Stalker's open-ended framework, but it was even more enamored by Half-Life 2 and its more focused, narrative-centric design. If it could create an experience that rivaled what Valve had managed to accomplish with the latter, it would be the ultimate achievement.
I'll take you.
Completing Metro 2033 would still be a challenging process for 4A. In addition to working hard on making sure their game looked and felt just as good as anything the competition would have to offer, the developers tasked themselves with excluding heads-up display elements from it wherever possible, forcing them to come up with a variety of creative workarounds to ensure critical information that would have otherwise simply been displayed on the screen was conveyed to the player in a more realistic and immersive manner. The studio also struggled for years to find a publisher interested in their work, with THQ, which had previously agreed to publish Stalker for GSC Gamer, only signing on to do the same for Metro 2033 in 2009. For all the hardships 4A dealt with, however, the studio managed to maintain a good relationship with Blukowski throughout the entire process, with the author providing suggestions, advice, and support up until the project's completion. The studio also didn't encounter any difficulties making Metro 2033's multiplayer mode, because it decided not to create one at all. In a generation where seemingly every shooter worth its salt featured some form of online multiplayer, 4A abstained from including one with its game, with producer Hugh Biden explaining in a 2010 interview with VG247 that they felt the value offered by Metro 2033's single-player campaign was more than worthwhile by itself. From 4A's perspective, there was no reason to take any additional boxes when the game already had everything it needed to enrapture its audience. And enrapture them it did. While Metro 2033 wasn't greeted by a mountain of supporters when it finally launched on the PC and Xbox 360 in March of 2010, it still managed to capture many hearts. Players were impressed with how consistently entertaining and well-paced Archam's journey through the Metro was, finding its eclectic mix of scenarios as varied as they were flush with atmosphere. From exploring a tunnel haunted by supernatural phenomena with the help of an odd mystic, to assaulting a burnt-out library alongside the Metro's military, the game almost never felt trite over the 11-odd hours it took to complete it. And as those who had read the book it was based on could attest, it did so while remaining faithful to its source material. It wasn't a one-to-one adaptation of Blukowski's novel. The Archam of the novel killed only a single person, for example, while the Archam of the game killed many more. But it depicted its most important characters, events, and motifs with relatively few concessions. Equal appreciation was directed at the unique mechanics and systems used by Metro 2033 to illustrate the scarcity of resources within its subterranean world. While the game provided Archam with a flashlight and night vision goggles, they both needed to be manually charged by a hand-operated dynamo. Likewise, gas masks needed to be constantly fed new filters when exploring the irradiated wastes above ground, as well as replaced when they became damaged. And military-grade bullets could either be used to give one's firepower an immediate extra kick, or conserved so that more lower-grade bullets, ability-enhancing suits, and firearms could be purchased later on. At a time when many of the video game industry's most notable survival horror titles were becoming increasingly action-oriented affairs, these elements, as well as the overall dearth of bullets within the game's environments, proved immensely pleasing. Metro 2033 wasn't overly scary in the way that Resident Evil or Dead Space were, but it succeeded in evoking a similar sense of tension. Unfortunately, these positives would be offset by a variety of niggling issues, not the least of which was the game's assortment of glitches. From small visual snags to game-breaking bugs, Metro 2033 possessed a host of technical issues. Not so many that it earned a reputation for being utterly broken, but enough to give it a reputation all the same. Many were also dissatisfied with the game's occasional stealth sections, finding the enemy's artificial intelligence in such scenarios to border on being unfair. If Archim so much as grazed an enemy's field of vision while attempting to weave around them, their entire cadre would more likely than not run immediately towards his location, with no buffer period in which they would attempt to search for it first. And while not as ubiquitous a criticism, a fair few players found the game's shooting mechanics to lack impact, complaining that enemies often didn't react at all when fired at. Despite attempting early on to break away from its spiritual predecessor's mold, Metro 2033's critical reception ended up being very similar to that of Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. Both were heralded for their immersive atmosphere, unique worlds, and distinctive mechanics and systems, yet panned for their frustrating and uneven levels of polish. Their harshest critics agreed that for all their flaws, they still contained a bevy of great ideas, while their kindest critics admitted that for everything great about them, there was a lot that could have been better.
We heard the commotion outside. Not one of them. Who are you? Don't be afraid. I'm gonna get you out of here.
In the months following Metro 2033's release, both THQ and 4A would let slip that plans were underway to continue Archim's saga.
Then it's over.
Want to see if you can get a car with your tax refund? Oh, yeah. Don't worry, it's free as drive time. They'll save you money on your down payment. $1,000 on average, so your tax refund can go a lot
You
further.
survived. You protected him. That's what matters. Now, your husband's waiting for you. Oh.
When Halo Combat Evolved landed on the original Xbox in 2001, the video game industry changed dramatically. Master Chief and the UNSC's battle with the pious forces of the Covenant helped legitimize the first-person shooter on consoles, established Microsoft as a contender in the industry, and launched one of the most venerated sagas in the history of video games. As with any franchise that has lasted several decades, however, an abundance of failed concepts, pitches, and ideas are to be expected. Halo is
I have much to confess.
Yet its most notable
I
failed
accepted a
projects are a
devil's
diverse and eclectic bunch, wandering far outside the fine shooting and vehicle mechanics that the series-numbered entries exemplify.
Let them talk.
From a melee-focused
You know there's
action
always
game
been
to a Mega
dirt
Bloks
on
platformer
my
teeming
hands.
with gags, the history of Halo's canceled games and concepts embodies the franchise's versatility.
Come back to the train with us. You should listen to your wife's aim.
But Hades and his demons. I am honor-bound to help you, Aeon, with what little honor a dicer like me has.
Olin, whatever your debts, you don't owe them to me now. Go with your family.
It's
So
easy
that-
to think that the
Farewell,
road to
Aloy.
Bungie's first foray into the Halo universe was a
Your mother.
straightforward experience.
I hope you
Halo Combat Evolved's world is so grandiose and earnest in its execution that one would believe the game was spurred into existence by a strong, singular vision that changed little throughout the game's realization. In reality, Combat Evolved, like many other classic games, underwent many changes and revisions prior to its release, much more so than any future Halo title. Originally, Combat Evolved started out in 1997 as a completely different genre of game. Bungie was hard at work on a sequel to their real-time tactics game, Myth: The Fallen Lords, and wanted to try and see if they could take the series' guts and bolster its appeal with a sci-fi aesthetic. This project, first codenamed Armor, then Monkey Nuts, and finally Blam, resulted in a real-time strategy game similar to Myth, but with a fairly big differentiating factor: vehicles. Beyond highlighting the game's more futuristic setting, the vehicles, which resembled early versions of classic Halo transports, underscored the game's physics-heavy nature as they drove realistically over its uneven 3D terrain. Then one day, as Bungie legend goes, one of the project's programmers, Charlie Goff, decided to attach the game's camera to an early version of the Warthog. Driving directly alongside the bump and sway of the rough-and-tumble vehicle proved so popular that the decision was made to overhaul the project into a third-person action game around the end of 1998. From there, the project would undergo many more revisions on the road to its release and first-person perspective. While certain narrative elements such as the Halo rings, the Covenant, as well as the game's overall look and feel came together relatively early on, early versions of the ring featured an abundance of native fauna, with the player even able to tame and ride a dinosaur-like animal known as a blind wolf. A lack of time, performance issues, and a concern that their presence would diminish the surprise of the flood led to them eventually being axed. Likewise, the challenges of game development would result in early ambitions of making Combat Evolved a dynamic, open world filled with far-reaching decisions, giving way to the more linear and segmented experience most are familiar with. And most famously, before even becoming the flagship title for Microsoft's Xbox, the game would originally be introduced by Steve Jobs as the future of gaming on Apple computers at Macworld 1999.
We're starting to see some great games come back to the Mac, but this is one of the coolest I've ever seen. This game is going to ship early next year from Bungie, and this is the first time anybody has ever seen it. It's the first time they've debuted it.
The subsequent success of both Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 2 would start turning the wheels on the ill-fated Halo movie. The film, which was to be directed by Neil Blomkamp and produced by Peter Jackson, would end up dead in the water in late 2006 as a result of a falling out between the film's creative executives and financial shareholders. However, amidst the movie's rise and subsequent fall, Peter Jackson was involved in another creative project within the Halo universe, Halo Chronicles. Announced at Microsoft's X06 trade show in 2006, Halo Chronicles was to be an episodic video game developed collaboratively by both Bungie and Jackson's new development studio, Wingnut Interactive. It was an exciting prospect, yet it was one that would ultimately prove unfulfilling, as years would pass without so much as a peep from either of the project's antennas.
Because
Not
we're
even
getting
a
slaughtered
tagline
out here.
escaped the game's Iron Curtain before its quiet cancellation in 2009, other than being described by Microsoft as a new chapter in the series and by Jackson as the filmiest game. Details as to what exactly Chronicles would have been like and why it was canceled would remain scarce until Waypoint Vice's Oral History of Halo in 2017, in which many of Halo's former designers would shed light on the project's nature. Apparently, Chronicles would have encapsulated the phrase, "Be the bullet," with the game following a normal, underpowered Marine who would gradually transform into a Promethean, a primordial and mysterious alien species as a result of them obtaining an alien arm. The player would have fought enemies entirely using melee combat and two non-lethal weapons, one that would allow them to stun their enemies, and another that would push them away. The player would have also had limited powers of flight, with the ability to perform long-distance dashes in the air early on, and eventually being able to transform into a missile and strike Covenant ships in low orbit once they had fully become a Promethean. Ultimately, expanding creative differences between Wingnut and Bungie, a lack of decisiveness on the game's story, and the Halo movie's cancellation resulted in Chronicles collapsing.
I can get out of
However,
this.
elements of the game's content would find their way into several future projects. Halo 3 ODST, which was greenlit to fulfill a contractual obligation with Microsoft that Chronicles was supposed to satisfy, would inherit the latter game's gunplay system, whereby large groups of enemies would only engage the player a few units at a time. Halo 4 would reintroduce and prominently feature the Prometheans, and the Neil Blomkamp film, District 9, would repurpose aspects of both the Halo movie and Chronicles plot, including, most notably, the main character's gradual transformation into an alien. Wingnut Interactive had failed to bring its Halo experience to fruition, but it wouldn't be the only non-major studio to do so. While the two developers were busy with their episodic experiment, the Microsoft-owned Ensemble Studios was working on two Halo projects of its own. The first was the real-time strategy game Halo Wars for the Xbox 360, which had started out development in 2004 as a new sci-fi property codenamed Phoenix, before Ensemble was urged by Microsoft to turn it into a Halo-themed one. The second was a massively multiplayer online game for the PC codenamed Titan, which also began its life as an original concept before being given the Halo name and universe to work with. Unlike Wars, however, the decision to make the MMO about Halo had never actually been officially approved by Microsoft. As explained in Jason Schreier's 2017 book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, by the mid-2000s, many members of Ensemble's older staff wanted to move on and do something new. The team was excited about the prospects of Halo Wars, but it was yet another real-time strategy game after years of working almost exclusively on the Age of Empires series. Their MMO would be their big break. an exciting chance to develop something mechanically different and carve an original identity for themselves. And so, the decision was made internally to make it about Halo, an internationally beloved property that the team already had experience working with, so as to try and put its chances of being properly greenlit. In an interview with Inc. Gamers in 2010, Ensemble Studios' Dusty Bachman revealed that the game would have utilized ideas and mechanics that several future MMOs would later incorporate, such as a cover system similar to the one in the Old Republic, and public quests that any players in a specific area could participate in, like those of Warhammer Online. Internally, many within Ensemble expected that the MMO was going to be huge, so much so that work began on a brand new campus that would support the game's development and maintenance post-release. Sadly, it wasn't to be. Sometime during 2007, the axe came down and the MMO was cancelled. Dusty Mock would claim that the decision was made as a result of a new
Now, get up to $2,500 in total savings on the 2019 Sonata during the Hyundai Auto Show bonus event going on now. Hurry to your local Hyundai dealer and get your limited time savings today. Visit buyhyundai.com for details.
Guard at Microsoft coming along that was incensed by the success of the Nintendo Wii and wanted its Xbox platform to go more in the direction of appealing to a more casual, broader audience. A MMO which would be both very expensive and appeal to a smaller niche of potential players was simply no longer viable. Jason Schreier's book would further elaborate on the circumstances in which Titan was cancelled, explaining that Halo Wars had also been chronically understaffed for years at this point, and desperately needed all hands on deck at Ensemble in order for it to be completed as it entered the final throes of its development. This, combined with Microsoft's increasing lack of interest in the PC at the time, as a result of the Xbox 360 success, left Ensemble with little room to haggle for the continued existence of their big pet project.
Maybe time to die.
This is Halo DS, and you're going to see some better videos on my blog. You've got basically multi-card play, single-card play, and a model viewer. We're going to do multi-card play, and I'm going to host the game here with Bozon. And you can see this is basically just a multiplayer mode right now.
At the same time that the Halo MMO was reaching the end of its troubled life, rumors of a much different and much smaller Halo game were beginning to take hold online. A Halo game for the Nintendo DS. The idea of Microsoft letting any one of its franchises, let alone Halo, appear on Nintendo's handheld platforms is a hard pill to swallow. Yet at the time, it was not without precedence. Because Microsoft lacked a portable console of its own, and thus was not competing with the rest of the industry in this field, the company didn't take issue with releasing its properties on its competitors' handheld devices. As a result, rumors of a portable Halo experience thrived for years. But concrete evidence of such a project would remain largely elusive until January of 2007, when IGN's former Nintendo editor-in-chief, Matt Casamassina, claimed on his blog that he had played a canceled Halo game for the DS. Describing the title as Metroid Prime Hunters with a Halo facelift, Matt claimed that it played remarkably well, but declined to detail who had developed it and why exactly it had been canned, other than that there were many egos involved in its development. Matt's blog post would ignite a swath of incredulous reactions from IGN's online community and beyond, with many commenters claiming that Matt was lying. Amidst the bustle of the internet, Halo's stewards would actually validate Matt's claims, with Bungie's Brian Gerard and Frank O'Connor telling Silicon Era at 2007's E3 that several Halo projects for the DS had been unsuccessfully pitched to them over the years, and that the game Casamassina was referring to was likely one of said pitches. But many remained skeptical. Finally, after close to a year, Casamassina would attempt to quell people's disbelief in October by showing Halo DS live in a video alongside IGN's Mark Bozon. In both the live video and additional gameplay footage that the editors would release shortly after, the two showcased what indeed appeared to be a Halo game built for the DS, demonstrating an ad hoc multiplayer match between the two in a lo-fi rendition of Halo 2's Zanzibar map. Similar to other first-person shooters on the DS, the top screen provided a clean view of the game's first-person action, while the bottom screen displayed health, ammunition, and other minutiae, and served to control the game's camera. Matt and Mark would bookend the video by stating that while the prototype they were playing was well over a year old, it was still fun to play, and that they hoped its creator, a major unnamed studio, would get another chance to prove themselves with the Halo license in the future. As with his January blog post, some commenters would cry foul, claiming that Matt had fabricated the demo. despite Bungie's Brian Gerard confirming to Kotaku shortly after that the game demonstrated was in fact a real unsolicited pitch they had received. Regardless, many would note following the video's publication that the pitch possessed several visual similarities to GoldenEye Rogue Agent for the DS, leading to a persistent theory that it was created using the James Bond game's engine and assets. It is unknown whether N-Space or EA Tiburon, which co-developed Rogue Agent, were also responsible for the Halo pitch, although this theory admittedly doesn't lend itself to many other possibilities.
Where did it go? I've lost it. Hey, wait a minute.
What is known is that years later, N-Space would end up developing another, vastly different Halo game for the greater part of 2013. Revealed in early 2017 through gaming archivist Andrew Borman's YouTube channel P2P Online, the game, codenamed Hagar, would have melded the worlds of Halo and Mega Bloks together into a kid-friendly platforming game for the Xbox 360. The player would have assumed the role of a blocky Spartan on a quest to exterminate the forces of the Covenant, using familiar weaponry and vehicles, such as plasma rifles, energy shields, warthogs, and ghosts, to smash their opponents into bricks. Players would have also been able to construct heavy ordnances, such as turrets, using bricks collected in the game's environment to gain an upper hand over their enemies, and use blueprints to create large structures that would allow them to proceed through stopgaps at each level. Similar to Traveler's Tales LEGO games, Hagar would have featured plenty of slapstick comedy moments, as well as a two-player cooperative multiplayer mode. And finally, the package would have been rounded off with Besieged mode, a tower defense mode in which players would have had to build up their base and defend it from increasingly aggressive waves of enemies. Hagar's existence would receive a strong positive reaction from the Halo community, prompting 343 Industries' Bonnie Ross to publicly comment on it, confirming its legitimacy, and stating that it had a lot of fun ideas and invention behind it, but ultimately didn't progress beyond what it managed to leak. While she did not provide much insight into why Hagar fell apart, it's reasonable to assume, as Andrew Borman does in his reveal video of it, that the game was likely hurt at least in part by Microsoft transitioning resources from the Xbox 360 to the Xbox One in 2013. Nonetheless, Brian Gerard would state a week later that given the game's strong reception, it's not impossible that another Halo experience in the style of Hagar may launch in the future. The latest publicly known Halo project to be cancelled would be Halo Online, a free-to-play Halo game announced in March of 2015 to be coming exclusively to the PC in Russia. Developed by Saber Interactive and published by the Moscow-based Innova Systems, Online would have functioned similarly to Activision's China-exclusive Call of Duty Online, allowing gamers to duke it out in a microtransaction-charged adaptation of the series' iconic multiplayer suite. While not possessing a single-player campaign, Online would have taken place within the series canon, occurring shortly after the events of Halo 3 on Anvil, a secretive UNSC space station where Spartan warriors train together to sharpen their skills and test experimental technology. The game would have been optimized to run smoothly across both high-end and low-end computers, and, as a result of being powered by a heavily modified version of Halo 3's engine, would feature many of Halo 3's maps at launch, along with a few original maps of its own. After cycling through both a closed alpha and beta throughout the better part of 2015, Innova Systems would announce that they were suspending the game's testing as a result of having encountered serious problems during its development. This announcement would be immediately followed by the release of a glossy new story trailer, suggesting that issues aside, Online was still on track to properly release. Unfortunately, it was not to be. After over half a year of inactivity, Innova Systems would announce in August of 2016 that Online had been cancelled, claiming that further development on the game had been stinted by Microsoft failing to make decisions on the future of the project. Despite being shuttered, the international Halo community would do their best to keep Online alive, modding the game into an expanded microtransaction-free multiplayer experience called El Dorito. The mod would enjoy a positive reception among Halo fans before Microsoft eventually stepped in and forced El Dorito's creators to cease its production in April of 2018. As significant as each of these projects may seem, They only represent a few of what is surely countless undertakings in the world of Halo that move with Halo Infinite. They'll undoubtedly be joined by countless more. Like Master Chief himself, the Halo universe follows a stylized set of codes and conventions, yet is still malleable enough that many different characteristics can be projected onto it. As long as it remains that way, many developers will continue to plug away at novel experience.
This is a commercial about buying cars. That's a car, this is the phone, and this is drive time. Ooh. Need to get a car with your tax refund? OMG.
Maximum strength, maximum armor, maximum speed. To PC gamers in the late 2000s, these words were the credo of a futuristic first-person shooter unlike anything else around it. Crysis. Developed by Frankfurt-based developer Crytek, Crysis dazzled the industry with its gorgeous graphics and open-ended gameplay, which encouraged players to make the most of both their own innate abilities and the environment around them. It was an uneven experience, one whose final third betrayed its strongest ideas. Yet it was one that found its way into the heart of many a player. And within a year following its release, it would be complemented by Crysis Warhead, an expansion in some ways even stronger than the base game itself. But as the years passed, Crytek would gradually migrate the franchise to home consoles, reinventing the series to better suit its new platforms for Crysis 2. The same time and effort that had gone into making the first game was there, and then some, but it lacked much of what made its predecessor special. A third entry, Crysis 3, would make an earnest effort to address players' complaints and bridge the two disparate directions the series had driven in, but the moment had passed, and players had moved on. This is the rise and fall of Crysis.
Keep your head down.
The story of Crysis begins in the late 1990s. Chiva Yurli, an avid lover of games from Coburg, Germany, had spent his early adulthood roping in his brothers and a collection of skilled developers from around the world to create video games. Banding themselves together under the name Crytek, with Chiva at the helm, the fledgling German studio would remain in obscurity until May of 1999, when the Yurli brothers would take a trip to the United States to showcase their work at the Electronic Entertainment Expo. After struggling to gain other attendees' attention, Chervat convinced graphics card maker NVIDIA to showcase one of their demos at their booth right as the E3 floor closed to the general public. It would be all that they needed. The demo, titled Exile Dinosaur Island, was a technical marvel. Where other 3D games of the same era struggled to render large viewing distances, let alone fill them with many graphically intensive objects, Exile showcased a vast virtual island that sprawled into the horizon, populated with hundreds of trees, roaming dinosaurs, and pools of water that reflected a setting sun. Deeply impressed with the nascent development studio's technical prowess, NVIDIA would sign a deal with Crytek to ship Exile as benchmarking software for its newly introduced GeForce graphics cards the following year. Inspired by its newfound fame, Crytek would begin development of an ambitious first-person shooter called Engelus. Elaborate in scope, Engelus would be showcased behind closed doors at E3 and publicly at the European Computer Trade Show in 2000, before ultimately being cancelled, with the game's former lead designer Brian J. Audette blaming the project shuttering on Crytek's then lack of experience. Nonetheless, Crytek's work on Engelus would help it to secure a deal with Ubisoft to turn their original Exile demo into a full-fledged game that Ubisoft would publish. Crytek would thus spend the next several years reinventing its breakout demo, dropping both its giant lizards and peaceful atmosphere in favor of mutants and turmoil, and developing a custom-made video game engine called CryEngine that it would run on to make it look even more beautiful. Dinosaur Island was out, and in its place was a first-person shooter called Far Cry.
Your way inside the compound is about as clear as it's going to get.
Sounds like a plan.
When that detonates, it could cause all sorts of strange things to happen.
Released in March of 2004 for the PC, Far Cry follows Jack Carver, an ex-Special Forces soldier who finds himself stranded on a Micronesian island, embroiled in a war between mercenaries and genetically altered beasts, known as the Trigens. Much like Exile, Far Cry is graphically impressive for the time in which it was released, featuring massive tropical environments covered in lush foliage. Gameplay-wise, however, the title is uneven. Far Cry's vast open spaces afford the player a wide degree of freedom, allowing them to approach each area using a variety of different tactics, whether in a stolen car or on foot, running in guns blazing or sniping at enemies while cloaked by the island's greenery. Jack Carver can act with a level of flexibility unseen in most other contemporaneous shooters. However, the game also features multiple indoor segments that revert to a much more linear and narrow design, doing away with much of what makes the rest of the experience special. Regardless, Far Cry would prove to be a massive critical and commercial success, establishing Crytek's reputation as a highly competent first-person shooter and game engine developer. But instead of immediately following up with a sequel, Crytek would hold back. The studio was eager to iterate on Far Cry's design, feeling that the specific circumstances of the game's development had impaired its ability to fully realize its potential. But Crytek was concerned that if the studio's next game was just a sequel, it might be perceived as a one-trick pony. As a result, Crytek would hand off the Far Cry series license to Ubisoft and begin work on a new project, one that would improve upon Far Cry's core tenets, yet would still be its own unique beast. His design team to take the game's lush jungle landscape and freeze part of it with an alien vessel at the center of this idiosyncratic landscape. This episode would prove to be the inception of Crytek's next opus, Crysis. First revealed to the public in March of 2006, Crysis, like Far Cry, would be a PC-exclusive first-person shooter set on an open-ended tropical island, but with icy aliens and territorial North Koreans as the player's oppressors, instead of mutants and mercenaries. Almost immediately, Crysis would grab the industry's attention with its outstanding technical prowess. Far Cry had looked and run impressively, but Crysis, which used Crytek's newly minted CryEngine 2, seemed to exist on a completely different plane. Early previews of the title emphasized cutting-edge features such as the fully destructible, physics-heavy environments, realistic ambient lighting, volumetric clouds, and much more, with Crytek boasting that its game contained over 1 million lines of code, a gigabyte of texture data, and up to 85,000 active shaders. The further the game approached its launch, the more the game's outstanding tech became mythologized to the point of parody. PC gamers would obsess over what technical specifications would allow them to run Crysis smoothly, let alone at all.
One of the things that most people ask me, Randy, they always ask me how Crysis is going to run with this card. Well, I'm not sure how Crysis is going to run, but, judging from the performance of the other DirectX 10 games, I would wager that one of these cards should be able to play Crysis with just about everything turned all the way up without any hitch.
Video game magazine Game Informer would jokingly claim that NASA supercomputers could only run the game on its highest graphics settings for 10 minutes before crashing, only to be taken completely serious.
I gotta go. Listen up. I'm gonna leave you some valuable info on how to upgrade your PC. Maybe you'll be brave enough to get a GeForce SLI rig. I hope. Gotta find a little courage, soldier. Get your rig ready. It's not gonna be pretty.
When it would finally release in November of 2007, Crysis would prove to be something of a digital chimera, containing blistering graphics, great ideas, and occasionally questionable execution.
Hey, Nomad, you still with us?
Taking place in the year 2020, Crysis follows Nomad, a member of the elite American Special Forces Group, Raptor team. Covered from head to toe in a adaptive bodysuit known as the Nanosuit, Nomad and the rest of Raptor are tasked with liberating the fictitious Lingshan Islands after they are hostilely taken over by North Korean forces, and later on, by a mysterious alien menace that emerges from the island's core. While an entertaining yarn, the game's narrative is largely window-dressing to the title's more noteworthy features, namely its graphics. Crysis is extremely pretty, and while certain textures have aged more poorly than others, as a whole, the game visually holds up well, with the game's lighting being especially noteworthy.
We're getting picked up.
At any point while playing Crisis, the player can use the nanosuit to switch between 4 distinct modes: strength, armor, speed, and cloak. Strength allows them to hit harder and jump higher. Armor reduces the amount of damage the player takes. Speed allows them to run incredibly fast. And cloak gives them the ability to turn invisible. However, the limited amount of energy powering each of the suit's modes, combined with the high amount of damage enemies perform when not in armor mode, limits its flexibility. Unless the player is profoundly skilled, it is much more advantageous to passively curtail or avoid conflicts altogether, using armor and invisibility, rather than running gung-ho into battle. Thankfully, the nanosuit's lack of versatility is offset by Crisis's level design. Much like Far Cry before it, Crisis's levels are expansive and open-ended, featuring numerous rideable vehicles across both land and sea, a wide array of gadgets and weapons to collect, and multiple side objectives that can earn the player further advantages on the field. The game's malleable physics allow the player to grab and throw most objects below their height, and, with the right firepower, destroy much of what they can see. Where the nanosuit sometimes struggles to provide the player with adequately viable gameplay choices, the environment around the player more than makes up for it, turning Crisis's levels into miniature sandboxes that portend experimentation. Roughly 2/3 through the game, however, Nomad becomes trapped within the aliens' mothership at Lingshan Center. When he re-emerges, the aliens flash freeze both the island and much of the metaphorical sandbox it contains. Levels become far more constrained and linear, offering fewer opportunities for the player to take advantage of the affordances that characterize the game's first half, and placing more of an emphasis on using powerful firearms to quickly turn toward aliens. Players that looked beyond the game's single-player campaign would find that Crisis had a few additional experiences to offer, parts of which harken back to the freedom of the game's first half. As was common with other shooters from its era, Crisis included a multiplayer suite, allowing up to 32 players at once to battle across 12 playable maps and 2 different modes: Instant Action, a standard deathmatch type mode, and Power Struggle, which pitted toe-to-toe soldiers against the Korean People's Army. In addition to having access to all of the nanosuit's abilities, Power Struggle allowed players to gain access to vehicles and capture bases that would allow them to procure increasingly powerful weaponry. While enjoyable, the mode struggled to attract a large audience, and the entire suite would eventually be shut down in June of 2014. Crisis also comes packaged with a sandbox editor, allowing for new levels to be created and edited using the game's built-in assets,
look upon our victory. A debt of blood is paid. Remember this day, brave Nora.
From your lips to the goddess's ears. Yes, remember it.
In the early 2000s, World War II shooters were seemingly everywhere.
Let your spears and arrows rest in the bodies of the fallen. They are painted
pervaded both
like
personal
these
computers
ruins.
and home consoles. While fun, these experiences were often formulaic, casting players time and time again as frontline soldiers in bombastic but heavily scripted action sequences across the war's greatest flashpoints. Running and gunning alone into the thick of battle was the name of the game, with little in the way of realism. In the midst of this glut of homogeneous experiences, one series of World War II shooters stood out above the rest: Brothers in Arms. Developed by Gearbox Software and published by Ubisoft, Brothers in Arms emphasized real-world tactics and teamwork over mindless gunplay, forcing players to work together with their in-game allies to overcome conflicts. While Brothers in Arms would experience a wave of popularity following its debut in 2005, bolstered by its affecting narrative and unique gameplay, its fame would gradually wane over time. Changing market conditions, a stream of middling mobile releases, and Gearbox's shifting priorities would slowly but surely drown the series out of the public conscience. And though there is reason to hope that the series may yet live again, an ill-fated attempt to revitalize the series in 2011 suggests that a new entry may still be far on the horizon. This is the rise and fall of Brothers in Arms. 1999, Gearbox Software had thrived creating expansion packs and ports for other developers' games. The company's first work, Opposing Force, was an expansion for Valve's seminal first-person shooter Half-Life, told from the perspective of one of the main game's enemy characters. The expansion was well received, with critics praising its engaging story and level design. By the mid-2000s, Gearbox had established a solid reputation for itself with 2 more Half-Life expansions and PC ports of popular titles such as Halo Combat Evolved and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 under its belt. But it was ready to create something original. Gearbox wanted to make a realistic first-person shooter set in the Second World War during the Normandy landings, one that would attempt to recreate 1944 France down to the accuracy of the streets, buildings, and regiment of paratroopers the player would fight alongside. Where prior video games were content to play fast and loose with their historicity, Gearbox Software's first original game would make every effort to provide as authentic an experience as possible. In order to do so, Gearbox Software hired U.S. Army Colonel John Entell.
Mortar started falling in the middle of the town square, and church is right up. This is the square.
Yes, this is exactly right. And right over here is the where they blind everybody up.
Drawing upon both his past career and extensive knowledge of military history, Entell helped Gearbox bring their painstakingly realistic vision of war-torn Normandy to life, bringing the development team to real-life battlefields upon which to draw inspiration, and introducing the developers to both active soldiers and veterans alike, so as to provide them with an intimate understanding of military officers' experience in the heat of combat. Finally, after much blood, sweat, and research, Gearbox's first self-owned opus was ready. In March of 2005, the studio would release Brothers in Arms Road to Hill 30 for the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC. In nearly all aspects of its design, Road to Hill 30 is effectively an antithesis to the World War II shooters present at the time in which it was released. In contrast to Call of Duty and Medal of Honor, whose high-energy narratives typically bounce between various locations over the course of several months, Road to Hill 30's story is focused and emotional, reminiscent of the television series Band of Brothers. Based on the real-life events of the historical Mission Albany, Road to Hill 30 cast players in the role of Sergeant Matt Baker of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment. After being dropped behind enemy lines on the eve of D-Day, the game follows Matt and his squad as they struggle to liberate several towns in Normandy over the course of 8 grueling days. The further they progress, the more the horrors of war strip their souls bare, leaving Matt and his squad both physically and emotionally indebted to each other's support. This unique focus on the intimacy between Matt and his team extends directly to Road to Hill 30's gameplay, where prior shooters offered players an arsenal of highly accurate firearms that encourage shooting recklessly and from afar. Road to Hill 30's firearms are both inaccurate and erratic. As a result, true to the actual era on which the game is based, the game encourages players to use the 4 F's of combat to eliminate threats. Find the enemy, fix them with suppressing fire, flank them with another fire team, and finish them off. As Matt, the player uses simple contextual commands to direct their squad into performing the 4 F's, all the while making their way across the battlefield. In addition, the game can at most times be switched to a top-down perspective, known as the situational awareness view, allowing the player to survey their environment for enemy positions and areas of cover uninhibited by the view in front of them. While this feature is obviously not as realistic as the rest of the game's mechanics, it further reinforces the game's tactical nature, calling to mind real-time and turn-based strategy games such as Command & Conquer or Company of Heroes. However, while these systems offered a much-needed breath of fresh air at the time of Road to Hill 30's release, their execution is far from perfect.
Keep your eyes peeled for more! Baker, get back!
Road to Hill 30's levels are often claustrophobic in their design, funneling the player forward and restricting the amount of opportunities they have to actually approach challenges tactically. Meanwhile, the game's enemy AI is simple, with most opponents remaining rooted in one place. While this makes finding, fixing, flanking, and finishing opponents easy early on, it ultimately results in the 4 F's formula feeling increasingly repetitive the more the game progresses. The PlayStation 2 version of the game is also notably less balanced than its fellow versions, with cover providing less protection and enemies being more difficult to incapacitate when being fixed with allied fire. While the PlayStation 2 version is still a strong experience overall, the game is better played on either the Xbox or PC. In addition to a single-player campaign, Road to Hill 30 also features standard multiplayer offerings in which players would control squads of AI teammates to outwit and defeat each other. While it didn't take the world by storm, and its online servers would eventually be shut down, it was nonetheless a solid proof of concept that Gearbox would iterate upon in the future. Road to Hill 30 was far from a perfect game, but in an era in which its contemporaries almost exclusively offered Hollywood-style interpretations of the Second World War, it did something different, and it did it well. With an engaging single-player campaign that emphasized the intimacy of its protagonists in both its gameplay as well as its story, and a solid multiplayer suite, Road to Hill 30 was both a hit amongst players and inevitable commercial success to guarantee a rapid sequel. October of 2005 for the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and PC, with a mobile version released in the same month by mobile game developer Gameloft. Taking place during and shortly after the events of the first game, Earned in Blood cast players as Joe Red Hartsock, one of Matt Baker's foremost companions in Hill 30, and follows him both under Matt's leadership and as the commander of his own squad in their continuing struggle to liberate Nazi-occupied Normandy. While Earned in Blood doesn't drastically reinvent what its predecessor began, its gameplay offers a host of new features and improvements. Chief among them are the game's vastly improved enemy AI. Rather than stay rooted in one spot for the player to find, fix, flank, and finish, enemy soldiers now react dynamically to the player's position. They'll move from cover to cover, attempt flanking maneuvers of their own, and be reinforced by other units as the battle progresses. This, combined with the game's battlefields, which are much more spacious and varied, results in enemy encounters being far more challenging and open-ended than what was offered in Road to Hill 30. Should you charge right into town and attempt to gun down the Germans before they can get too close to you? Or is it better to flank the town off to the right until you find advantageous terrain from which to fire on your enemies? Tactical questions of this nature comprise the bulk of Earned in Blood, making the game far more engaging from top to bottom than its predecessor. Earned in Blood's multiplayer offerings are also much more expanded over Road to Hill 30's. The game's original competitive multiplayer suite includes more maps, and a new cooperative multiplayer mode, titled Skirmish Mode, allows players to play through the game's single-player missions as a team, or take on other self-contained scenarios with unique and challenging win conditions. Like Road to Hill 30, however, its online servers would eventually be pulled, meaning that Skirmish Mode can currently only be experienced locally. Earned in Blood would be well received by critics and players alike. While some lamented how similar the game was to its predecessor, its swath of mechanical improvements, the inclusion of Skirmish Mode, and the impressively short turnaround time in which they were implemented appeased many. With Road to Hill 30, Gearbox established Brothers in Arms as a force to be reckoned with in the first-person shooter space, and with Earned in Blood, they had further cemented its authority by responding quickly to players' criticisms. Once again, however, the PlayStation 2 version of the game possessed a few notable drawbacks. The AI of the player's squad is decidedly less intelligent than that of the Xbox or PC, frequently getting stuck on objects or responding incorrectly to the player's commands, and the game's multiplayer offerings would suffer from severe lag when played online. While these platform-specific issues did little to tarnish its game's overall legacy, both Road to Hill 30 and Earned in Blood's problems on the PlayStation 2 would come to haunt the series later on. But before that could happen, the franchise would see itself expand to nearly every platform under the sun. In the interim following Earned in Blood's release, Gearbox was eager to quickly capitalize on the series' newfound success, and Sony's powerful new portable console, the PlayStation Portable, seemed the perfect home for ports of 3D action games from home consoles. And so, in November of 2006, Brothers in Arms D-Day would release for the PlayStation Portable. Developed by Ubisoft Shanghai, D-Day follows Matt and Red's exploits from the series' previous games, recycling past missions and scenarios in what is effectively a scaled-down supercut of Rotail 30 and Earned in Blood's best single-player missions. While technically impressive for the time at which it was released, many of the PlayStation Portable shortcomings weaken the experience. The portable console's middling processing power results in many of the game's more intensive segments running poorly, and its analog nub lacks the versatility to control both the player and their squad effectively. The result is an experience that, while by no means bad, is difficult to recommend over the two games it is patchworked from. The game received a lukewarm critical and commercial reception and failed to attract the same enthusiasm as the series prior to releases. But it demonstrated that the series could function, albeit in a limited fashion, in portable form, prompting a slow but uninterrupted invasion of portable and mobile games for the rest of the series line. The series' next entry, Brothers in Arms DS, would release for the Nintendo DS in June of 2007. Developed by Gameloft, the title is effectively a Brothers in Arms game in name only. Taking place from a third person instead of a first person perspective, Brothers in Arms DS is a linear and scripted experience, more in the vein of Call of Duty, largely doing away with the tactical elements that characterized its predecessors and featuring little in the way of story. Judged on its own merits, however, the game is not that bad. As a technical showcase for the Nintendo DS's capabilities, Brothers in Arms DS is impressive. In addition to featuring detailed 3D environments and surprisingly high-quality audio, the game makes strong use of the DS's stylus for aiming and selecting weaponry, making up for the console's lack of analog sticks. For Nintendo DS owners looking for a solid action mix in the middle of the system's life, Brothers in Arms DS was a fine choice. But to fans of the franchise's prior entries, it was of little interest. An inoffensive but dissonant footnote to the still young series. While the PlayStation Portable and the Nintendo DS had helped Brothers in Arms remain in the public consciousness throughout 2006 and 2007, 2008 would end up being the franchise's biggest year since its inception, with no fewer than 5 different games released. First, Brothers in Arms DS would see itself ported to both the Nokia N-Gage and the iPhone by Gameloft. The N-Gage port, released in July of 2008, simply titled Brothers in Arms, is vastly inferior to its DS cousin. In addition to suffering from poor frame rate, players using an N-Gage with only one set of directional buttons are forced to control both the protagonist's movement and aiming using the same D-pad, turning the game into a chore to play. The iOS port, released in November, entitled Brothers in Arms,
Root cares about that oh-so-rare concept in the insurance industry, fairness. Instead of basing your rate solely on these, it charges you primarily based on one thing, how you drive. Crazy, right? You just download an app and drive around for a few weeks. Then, Root's artificial intelligence runs the numbers. Since Root doesn't insure guys like Speedy McLeadfoot over here, you don't pay for their accidents. When you get your personalized quote, it can be up to 52% less than what you're paying now. And the whole experience is totally modern. No massive pages and questions, just a streamlined process right from the app. Believe it, cancel your own policy. It's how insurance should be. So, seriously, stop settling. Download the Root app. Get car insurance. Now, the Vulture.
Of its N-Gage cousin, it suffers from its own clumsy control scheme that slows movement to a crawl. In contrast, Brothers in Arms Art of War, which was also developed by Gameloft but released earlier in the year, in March, manages to do more with less. Unlike Hour of Heroes, which features fully 3D environments in which the player directly controls both their movement and camera, Art of War is a top-down, sprite-based action game reminiscent of classic arcade games. While once again a far cry from the series' tactical origins, the game is still solid in its own right, and most importantly, is relatively easy to control. where with Hour of Heroes, Gameloft tried to force a DS game onto a platform unsuited to its complex control scheme. The developers of Art of War worked with the mobile phone's limited affordances to create a simpler but far more enjoyable experience. However, these titles did little to overshadow the Brothers in Arms series' fourth and most significant release of 2008, Brothers in Arms, Hell's Highway.
On three!
Released for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in September, and PC in October, Hell's Highway had experienced a long and troubled development.
It's not flat like you thought.
Why would I think that? During eclipses, the shadow cast on the moon is curved. So our world is a globe. And it looks like this, from a distance.
We'll discuss this another time. Back to the matter at hand.
The Faro robots were spreading across the world, eating everything up. Somehow, Elizabeth stopped them before it was too late. But how? The eclipse. Tampering with the metal devil. Another collision. And this one can move.
Damn, another death burner. Destroy this platform or else I wouldn't have been here.